Hello and welcome to another Hot Topic election special. I'm Hugh Richards, and once again we bring this programme from the beautiful St Mary's Church in Cottingham. This time I'm talking to candidates for Beverley and Holderness. They are Gary Shawes for UKIP, Margaret Pinder for Labour and Richard Howarth for the Green Party. We did invite other candidates, but for one reason or another they weren't able to join us. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
Gary, may I start with you? UKIP has been in the news as always recently, this time round for some regrettable comments made by one of your members in Nigel Farage's own constituency down in Kent. Just establish for me, what is the UKIP policy towards its members who come out with quasi-mad statements?
They get investigated and if found like any other crime, if you like, if they're guilty, suspended and kicked out the party.
Why is it that there are so many of these statements coming out of the slightly nuttier fringes of the UKIP party?
Well, it's because the media is focusing on us. You also get it coming out from the Lib Dems. They have nutters themselves, Labour as well, and Conservatives. They also have their own set of cranks that the media aren't interested in picking up on that.
So it's not the fact of the statement, it's the reporting of the statement.
Well, absolutely.
This is a media...
Well, obviously if they're coming out with it, it's wrong, and get kicked out of the party and suspended, but obviously the media whips it up. I mean, the Lib Dems, I mean, there was one the other year who was planting little homemade bombs underneath cars down south. That just made the regional press, it didn't actually make the national press.
Margaret, is this the case? Are all the parties full of cranks and nutters?
Well, I think there's cranks and nutters and cranks and nutters. And every party is going to attract people with, let's say, some quirky views. I think what we're talking about are views that are actually completely unacceptable. And you rather put your finger on it in that we're not talking about one-off incidents, which is what you will find with almost any party. We're talking about a consistent pattern of really deplorable comments that show the true, I think, aspect of UKIP. I'm sure it's full of very honourable people. I'm sure my colleague here, my opponent here, Gary's an honourable person, but unfortunately he's standing for a party that is full of people who are willing to make these truly appalling comments, racist comments, on a regular basis. And it's not just cranks and nutters. We have UKIP in the European Parliament who've aligned themselves quite cynically with a neo-Nazi group in order to get funding from the European Parliament. So it's not just cranks and nutters, it's actually systemic and inbred in the whole way the party is conducted.
If we're coming there, I mean, the Labour Party, there's been various councillors throughout tweeting homophobic comments. I mean, that's go on Facebook there. There's an entire list of them where Labour councillors are coming up with derogatory terms about people as well. So, I mean, just to go down it with UKIP, I mean, that Labour's just as guilty as anyone else.
Richard, by definition, almost the Green Party must have its occasional eccentric.
I mean, the Green Party is quite different to the other parties in that all our policies are based on a set of core values. So that runs through all our policies, and that means that you don't end up with people who hold extreme views. I think people need to be quite wary of UKIP because I think they're a wolf in sheep's clothing, and what we're seeing there is occasionally we do get to see their true colours, and that is what's happening in incidents like that. But also, I think they are purporting to represent working people and everyday people while pursuing policies that do exactly the opposite and actually are exploiting vulnerable people. And people need to be very aware of that.
Can I just take issue there when you say that the Green Party is different because all its policies are based on core values? How can you say the other parties are not based on core values? Every party is. I mean, the issue is not whether parties have core values. Obviously, the Labour Party has core values. If you only look at history, the Conservative Party does, the Liberals do. That all the parties have core values. The issue is whether you agree with them. Yes, you do. I mean, I find them fairly deplorable on many levels. But the issue is not that the parties lack core values. The argument is about, the debate is about how you identify with those values and how those carry through into policy and how the parties conduct themselves.
And to say a little bit more, to expand on that a little bit more, what I mean is that we have free market capitalism is failing us economically, environmentally and socially. And a lot of those threats are part of the same bigger problem, but only the Green Party has policies where you're looking to solve all of those issues rather than perhaps looking at one issue, such as pursuing pro-business interests, while at the other hand increasing levels of pollution and harming the environment or harming social policies and vulnerable people on another. So at the minute we have a government and all the other parties, people are beginning to see they're getting sick of these grey parties who are all pursuing a policy of austerity, which is making the most vulnerable people in society pay for mistakes that were made in the financial sector. And that's unfair, and only the Green Party has got the policies to stand up and change that and do something about it. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and there is no excuse for us making vulnerable people in society pay for mistakes in the financial sector.
You make a criticism there of free market economics, as you call it. And your party does seem quite illiberal in some ways, very high taxation, very high regulation. If Margaret offers me a cup of coffee for 50 pence and you offer me a cup of coffee for £1, your policy would be that I have no choice but to pay the £1 and buy your cup of coffee rather than buy Margaret's cup of coffee, which is just as good. Would that be the sort of regulation of the free market that you're suggesting?
No, what we're talking about is there's a huge amount of wealth in society, but inequality has been increasing for years now under all the recent governments. And that is wrong. And that can be changed with some... So, for example, the wealth tax is looking at a 1% tax on people who earn who have more than £3 million. Now, that's a very small fraction of society, so that's not a radical change.
Margaret, my analogy with the cups of coffee there, the free market, it seems that without a free market, there's no freedom.
The free market, I think this is where the Greens are being disingenuous. The free market is what we have. I have some sympathy with the idea that free market capitalism, especially globalization, is problematic in many ways, especially for parties more to the left that have views on individual rights and responsibilities, but that is the system we have. Now, the Labour Party is the party that attempts, the only party that is attempting actually to balance the rigours of free market economics with policies that actually mitigate those for those at the bottom. The Green Party's policies may sound very fine, but I mean, I'm sorry, you've taken an absolute beating this week, quite rightly, because when those policies are actually put to the test, and I'm not just talking about the interview, Natalie's interview, but subsequent to that, 3 Green leaders were asked to explain policies cost them, couldn't do it. So it's, you know, your policies, while they sound very fine and while one can have sympathy for them, they're actually incoherent. The Labour Party is the one party that actually has an eye to understanding pragmatically how the current free market economy works, but trying to manage that and be pragmatic while actually mitigating that so it does not impact on the environment, does not impact on the people at the bottom of the heap. And I think we're the only party that does that.
Margaret, you said, forgive me, Richard, you said a moment ago that the Labour Party, like any other party, has its core values.
Yes.
And you addressed the free market there. Those core values have changed over the recent decades, though, haven't they, at the Labour Party? The attitude to the free market of Clement Attlee, for instance, would be quite different to the attitude of the quasi-Heath-like Tony Blair as Prime Minister. He was a Labour Prime Minister who rather supported the free market.
I don't think core values do change. I think...
Well, let me just be more precise about that point. In the 1940s, the first majority Labour government, there was a great campaign, a successful campaign for the state to take over the great heads of industry. In the early 21st century, Tony Blair, as a Labour Prime Minister, was a great supporter of a free market attitude to the economy. Peter Mandelson said we're intensely relaxed about people becoming very rich.
Yes,
that's a change,
right.
Isn't it?
It is a change, but what I'm saying is the core values of any particular party tend to abide. Personalities come and go. Times come and go, circumstances change. We're in Europe, we're not in Europe. That affects the whole way you could conduct your political system. You have leaders who have, like Tony Blair, who was definitely right of centre. There are those people in the Labour Party, and at the same time in the Conservative Party, there are those who are more right of centre and those who are left. And politics tend to swing and change depending on who is particularly in power at the time. I think on the mood of the nation, the pragmatics of where the nation is in one time. But I think if you stray too far from those core values, and I know the Labour Party is being criticised for this, and I have sympathy with people who criticise the Labour Party for this. So if as a party you stray too far from your core values, then I think you are in danger of alienating your electorate. Any party does need to remember where they come from and stay with those values.
Gary, I'm too pleased with my coffee cup metaphor, so I'm going to ask you, if I'm presented with 2 people equally qualified to do a job, one of them's from Yorkshire, but the one who's maybe slightly better qualified is from Bulgaria, why should I not employ the Bulgarian?
Well, we'd scrap any differentiation like that. You should give priority to the British candidate, first of all. If they have the better skills, then take them on.
But what if they don't have the better skills?
If they don't have the better skills, well, obviously you won't employ them.
What if they demand more money?
Yeah, obviously I can see what you're getting at. It's immigration. Are you going to come on to that? Right. To be up, so it makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah. Our policy is a dead simple one. Like Australia, you come over here, if you have so much in the bank, you know, we'll decide on that. So you can look after yourselves for 5 years. We don't want you coming over here with no job offer and, you know, you've got bad health and then expecting to sponge off the state straight away. You'll come over here, we'll accept you, we'll give you a work visa if you've had a job offer and you have like a national insurance where you could
registration of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go on the NHS then. But you have to have your own private insurance to come over here. Like if you went abroad, you take your holiday insurance, make sure you had an accident. You come over here, you do that for 5 years until you've been and contributed into the pot for 5 years. It's like anything else. You're not going to claim out of it until you've actually contributed. Simple, Australian-style point system.
But I'd still be free to employ the better qualified Bulgarian.
If they spoke the language, they had enough money in the bank, and they were here for 5 years,
it's a job in which language isn't necessary, say.
Tell me which job you don't need English with.
It's a knitting factory.
Gary, we'll come back to it in a moment. I mean, we can come up with the hypotheses, but we'll come back with that in a minute. We must stop there. Forgive me, all of you. Please come back and join us after the break. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm talking to the candidates of Beverley and Holderness, and they are Gary Shawes for UKIP, Margaret Pinder for Labour, and Richard Howarth for the Green Party. Gary, we were talking about the idea of employing people from abroad within the European Union. What happens if they're better qualified or cheaper? Your party would suggest that there would be limitations on migration coming in, even if it's to the benefit of British employers.
It's not just the EU immigration, though. Ours would be a blanket control of all immigration coming into the country. Labour, Tories, Lib Dems, they're all trying to say that they're going to control immigration. They can only control immigration for those outside of the EU, and they say they're going to come down hard on it. It's poppycock. You know, we've not had any policies on immigration regards them, how they're going to control it. If you're going to be fair, they are the parties of discrimination, discriminating in between the citizens of the EU and the rest of the world. Ours is, we're going to control the borders, allow in people who have the money in the bank, like we say, clean bill of health, you know, contribute into the pot beforehand. And if you necessarily speak English.
Margaret, the Labour Party has a very positive attitude to the European Union, doesn't it? Is there not something to be said for being liberated from the, if not the migration issue, but just simply for the regulation and the expense issue of being part of the European Union?
No, I do actually feel I have some expertise here because I'm a solicitor and one of my areas of expertise is actually EU law and EU procurement law. It would be a disaster for us to leave Europe. When it comes, Gary's quite right, there are two areas of immigration is not necessarily the right word to use within the EU. Within the EU we have, by the treaty, free movement of goods, free movement of services. People say it's free movement of people, but actually it's not. It's free movement of workers. It is free movement of workers, and a lot of people don't get that. And that is actually quite different from just free movement of people. So the issue is about people being able to move. It should be about work, moving to work, not just moving randomly. Outside the EU, it has to be managed. Now, saying it's the party of discrimination...
It has to be managed inside the EU as well. You can't just have
I've just made that point, that it's workers, it's not just random migration. Migration, economically, has always been a force for good. The figures show that. I've been an economic migrant. I've worked in Germany. I've worked in the USA. Shame on me. I have contributed to those societies. I have gained skills and experience there that I've brought back and used here. So the danger is, what happens, I mean, the rhetoric of parties like UKIP, they pick on small, unattractive examples, and this is used across the board, and use those to undermine the whole system.
I've just told you the policy twice, quite simply, what our policy is. There is no picking on anyone there. It's simple.
Say whether party discrimination, any kind, once you have nationhood, you have inherent discrimination. We decide we are a British...
Do you want to see the abolition of the UK?
I'm not. I'm saying that to have... I'm just saying, you say the party of discrimination. If you decide you form an identity as a nation, you're automatically forming a form of discrimination. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but you privilege your own citizens,
to that idea of nation
and that's reasonable.
And sovereignty. Richard, to bring you in just on the EU, Presumably for the Green Party, the EU isn't nearly big enough because the environmental problems faced by the planet would best be solved by a global government almost. You can't control what's going on over Europe without controlling what's going on across the Atlantic or the Pacific for that matter.
Well, there are some issues which can only be fixed internationally, but I think that's a different issue to the EU, which we are very much a part of. The Green Party is a party that believes in democracy. We think that the EU has problems which need to be solved, so we are yes to reforming the EU, yes to a referendum, and yes to staying in Europe.
Well, if you're yes to a referendum, then presumably in that referendum you would be campaigning to stay in Europe.
Exactly. This is our largest trading partner. It's really important that I think that we do stay in Europe, and it's a huge amount of benefit. There are vast numbers of British people working all over Europe, and that's the benefit we have. And both European workers and internationally, migrants are a net benefit to the UK and the UK economy. And I think it's important to remember that and not to give in to the temptation of scapegoating or to scapegoating.
Margaret, I just want to come back. You mentioned nationhood, the idea of sovereignty, and these ideas have been reinforced in the last year by the Scottish vote to stay within the United Kingdom. One of the consequences of that is that the general election, the chances are the Scottish National Party is going to take 20, 30 seats from the Labour Party in the House of Commons. How happy would your party be about going into coalition with Alex Salmond?
Well, I wish I was so elevated within the party that I could answer that. I think coalition is never out of the question. I think what's most important is that we don't have another 5 years of a Tory government or any coalition, or we're going to lose the NHS. That's my bottom line at that point. I don't think the SNP and Labour are a million miles apart on policy. I personally was very pleased the referendum went the way it did. There were various good things about it. I understand the sense of nationhood. Nationhood has different things. There's your personal sense of identity. But the point I was making was not that nationhood is inherently good or bad, but if you create a sense of nation or a larger region, you are creating a form of you will privilege some people over another. That's not necessarily bad. You have to do it. It's the only way a system can function. Otherwise, that's exactly how you control immigration, that you privilege certain people over another in a way that manages the system for the good of everybody. In terms of one of the good thing I thought was about the referendum, I'm going off on a tangent here, was the number of young people involved. Young people involved. Right. The Scottish referendum. And so I think it will be interesting. In this election, I think all the bets are off. Scotland will be very interesting because they galvanised such a huge vote. I would love to see that spill over into this country. And then we will see how the vote goes, because I think all the bets are off.
Gary, on this idea of nationalism, presumably you would be absolutely in support of the Scottish National Party, because you're very much in sympathy of the idea of a nation being separate and sovereign and autonomous and independent.
I'm all for a United Kingdom.
Well, why is it, what's the distinction between Britain shouldn't be part of Europe, but Scotland should be part of Britain? Both are unions of sovereignty.
Yeah, our union's been around for a lot longer than the United Kingdom.
So is it just longevity? We are being ruled, years
we're being ruled by 28 unelected commissioners sat in Brussels. So we've got some Greeks, Portuguese, Latvians telling our country what to do. Why should we be ruled by a foreign nation? That's what it comes down to. Being in the EU,
well, why should
being in the EU is not just about trade. Trade is just a facade. Being in the EU is all about loss of sovereignty. And when it was first come about, that was even said to Ted Heath in cabinet papers that have been released. Senior civil servants even told him that it's all about loss of sovereignty and forming a United States of Europe.
I want to just move on to the economy now, which seems to be one of the major issues of this election campaign. The various attitudes to the debt and the deficit as two separate things that various different parties wish to pay off. The Labour Party wants to pay off the deficit but not the debt. Other parties, including the parties in power, would like, the Conservative Party anyway, would like to pay off both, and which involving much more austerity. What would the Green Party attitude to the economy be, Richard?
Yeah, we want a strong economy and we want a fair economy, and that's the most important thing.
We all want a strong and a fair economy. How do we get there?
Well, we need to remember that we are one of the richest countries in the world and that the wealth is there. The problem is that it's not getting to the people who need it most. There are abolishing Trident would save up 40 billion, maybe 100 billion, clamping down on tax dodgers. Caroline Lucas was supporting a bill in 2011 to try and do that. That's come back in the news recently. And a wealth tax on on the most wealthy in
We
society.
already have a wealth tax. We're already paying 10, 20, 40% on everything we make. Everything
There's-
that we earn, we're having chunks of it taken away.
All the other all the grey parties that people are now getting so sick of, there's people with a large amount of money who are getting wealthier simply by having that wealth, and that's not fair. So the Green Party's policy is to make sure that the wealth gets to the people who need it.
Is this the present Green Party rhetoric that the other parties are the grey parties?
Yes, I did notice that. It's
yeah.
quite amusing, actually.
Well, it's a perfectly good piece of political poetry. There's nothing wrong with
I
that.
mean, this is a really exciting election. No one really knows
Yes.
quite how this election is going to turn out, and people are coming to the Green Party in droves. If people vote on the policies that they believe in and they vote blind, then the people of Beverley and Holderness have put Green Party policies first.
Gary, just to get back specifically to the economics, what would be the UKIP policy towards economics having withdrawn from the European Union?
We need to clear the debt straight away. The deficit, as you know, is just how much, the difference in borrowing you're taking each month.
Clear the debt straight away?
No, we need to clear it. You can't clear it straight away. That'd be ridiculous. I mean, the debt at the moment, according to the Treasury's own figures, is at £1.5 trillion. £1.5 trillion. If you sticked pound notes, not end to end, but stacked them up, that would be 93 miles high.
Right, it's a large amount.
So, absolutely. And this national debt has doubled under the Conservatives what it took Labour 13 years to build up. The Tories have doubled it in 4 years. So
how would UKIP pay it off then?
you aren't going to pay it off overnight, but we can start saving billions straight away. Foreign aid. Only give foreign aid where it's required. If there's flood relief that's required, being a tsunami, famine, we'd put money into inoculation programs and freshwater programs, but giving money to China, giving money to Argentina, who's buying bombers, jet fighters and ships of China.
Debt, Gary.
I wonder what Argentina's going to do with those, but we need to do foreign debt. That would save £1 billion a month.
We only have a minute or two left, Gary, so I must let Margaret answer that question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you got it absolutely the wrong way around. You pay off your deficit, not your debt. Constantly, politicians are trying to evoke the idea of the housekeeping budget as a good model for national government. It's a really bad model. Governments don't work that way. Governments will always carry debt. You have to carry sensible levels of debt. That's the issue. The deficit is the problem. The deficit is between what you're bringing in and what you're taking out. That's the problem. And that's where the issue is.
But
Forget
each month
the
that deficit gets put on the debt. It's like paying on your
No,
credit card.
it's a
Each month it gets
fundamental.
put on
People
there.
don't understand the difference between debt and
Is
deficit.
debt inevitable, though? I mean, there are
Yes,
countries which
yes.
don't have debt. There are countries, largely oil-rich countries, admittedly, that don't run a national
Yes,
debt.
but they have very, very extraordinary circumstances. Most countries, it's about a reasonable level of debt. Most households carry a level of debt. You have mortgages, what have you, because that's how you have to function. It doesn't make your household unviable. It's how you manage it in different
We've only got
levels.
such a massive debt because politicians have been irresponsible. There's two ways you can
You're
do it.
still
Either
failing
increase
to-
your
sorry,
income
it's my
or
turn,
reduce
Gary.
your
My turn,
Well, I'm
Gary.
afraid it can be nobody's
Yes.
turn. I hope you've all had
Yes.
a fair crack at the Rick, but I'm afraid we've run out of
Oh,
time
thank
for
you.
this
That's
one
wonderful.
round.
Please join me again for the next Hot Topic election special, but until then, for now, goodbye.